Welcome, everybody, to DNS Unfiltered, your once a month sneak peek into DNSFilter. I'm your host, partner evangelist, Mikey Pruitt. We're here to show you some cool updates, show off some new stuff, chat with big names in tech, and hear stories from DNSFilter users. Did you know DNS Unfiltered used to be our little secret, only available to partners in our 2,000 member plus private community? But the word's out and the content is too good to keep to ourselves. So we're opening it up for everyone. Whether you've been with DNSFilter for a while or just found out about us, there's something for you. So what's new at DNSFilter? First off, we made some changes to how we categorize some very popular webmail domains. Certain Gmail domains will be listed under both webmail and chat and business. This helps your policies be more accurate about what kind of sites they block or allow. March was busy. We updated our Chrome roaming client to keep your dashboard clutter-free by managing how devices connect. We also made the web app better. Our new malicious domain protection category is enabled by default on your first policy. We tweaked the navigation UI, improve search on our reporting system, and smooth some rough edges on filtering schedules and universal lists. For Windows users, we have two new versions of our roaming client, version 1.13 in beta and 1.12.1 in production. The prod release has a new update certificate, which aims to correct auto-update issues and other fixes like connecting faster, not overloading your domain controller. You can now deploy no policy for testing purposes, and we didn't forget about Mac users. The macOS roaming client beta has improved captive portal handling just in time for travel season. You can find more details and stay up to date by checking feedback.dnsfilter.com/changelog. But stick around at the end of this episode. I'll share a cool new feature from DNSFilter that you might not know about yet. It's going to make your online life much more secure. Now, let's bring on our guest. I'm joined by Derek Gabriel, one of the CAB members for DNSFilter. Derek, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I own an MSP currently. I live in Honolulu, Hawaii. I've been doing this for over 20 years, which is probably way too long. Big Microsoft fan. We use a lot of Microsoft technology. Most of our small, medium-sized customers, average customer size is probably around under 100. We have a couple that are a little bit over, but the average is probably right around 100. And we've got roughly 15 fully managed customers and just a couple of staff members. Yeah.
You know what's funny? I had the pleasure to meet Derek at a conference not too long ago, and we chatted before on our customer advisory board here at DNSFilter. And Derek was telling me a lot about his history, and you started off with like postscript programming and some other wild adventures, and all of that eventually led into like MSP land. And I'm curious, why do you think that progression happened? Do you think it was natural, like, and everybody kind of ends up there, or
I think it's not natural. It's horrible.
Don't do it.
Yeah, no, that's my honest advice about entrepreneurs. It was funny. I was at a chamber lunch yesterday, and they had the speaker was talking about internships, and they have it's a nonprofit organization that's got a partnership with our public school system, and they essentially facilitate getting people into internships that are in K through 12, and all I could think about was when they were asked, one of the questions they posted, they had a couple of seniors that were in high school that they were interviewing that, were speaking about the internships they had been through and whatnot. And all I could think about when they asked one of them what their next, what are your next plans? And she was like, oh, I'm going to go to college. I'm like, good, go to college. And then they were talking to another person that was like, well, I think I'm going to skip college and maybe get into entrepreneurship. And I'm like, no, bridge out, turn around, don't do it.
Don't do it.
Like it's like you're gonna regret that later. You're really gonna want to go to school. You want to go to school, like. But anyway, I joke about that. But ultimately, I think it's a more natural progression for MSP business owners or tech people in general, with the technical skill, right? Because it's plumbers, dentists. Well, you got to go to school for that. But
Yeah, I get
one of I think it's Robin Robbins that famously says, people have an entrepreneurial seizure, and I fully had that. Like, I was young.
Entrepreneurial seizure.
Yeah, I was young, and I thought, I could do this for a living. I can run a business. But yeah, it's not just solving technical problems, right? And I think that's how we all start out. And life was easier 20 years ago, in a number of ways. And so that's sort of how it happens. It's like, you accumulate technical knowledge, and you realize at some point, as horrible as it sounds, but you're like, oh, I know more than my boss. So if he can do this, or other business owner can do this, then why can't I?
Yeah.
And the answer is there's a lot of other crap involved. That's why you can't do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's funny because I had all those same challenges that regular business owners have, but we don't recognize that necessarily in the MSP industry, right? We're always so focused on the technology, and I don't think we focus nearly enough on the business. And so it's the same reason, I think I can do accounting, or I think I think I can do all of these things.
You can't.
Marketing and sales, right? I think I can do those, but I just can't do them well, right?
Or all well at the same time.
Right. 100%. Because the idea that we can multitask is total BS. And so when you learn to outsource those things, right? I need to outsource. You end up having to convince yourself the same way you have to convince your clients that they need to outsource their IT or their cybersecurity, that you need to outsource your accounting and other things like that, or you need salespeople or a marketing team and stuff like that.
Yeah, I heard an interview with Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, on the Acquired podcast. Not sure if anyone's ever heard of that. Really good. You should check it out. And at the end, they asked him, if it was you 20 years ago and you knew everything you knew now, what would you do? And he goes, I wouldn't start NVIDIA. He's like, I wouldn't do it. He was kind of meaning he didn't realize how hard it was going to be. He kind of elaborated on it, but the clip went viral,
right? And
he's like, I wouldn't do it. So yeah, I totally understand that. I think every entrepreneur ends up there like, oh my God, this was way harder than I thought.
If I'm completely honest, and I think this is another horrible part of our industry that is the underbelly we don't talk about, but entrepreneurial poverty is real, right? Mike Michalowicz in his first book, Profit First, talks about how he sold his tech company and then goes out and buys a fancy car, and suddenly in a short period of time, his daughter's busting open her piggy bank to help them cover family bills, supposedly, right? But that happens, right? And even before an exit, I'm at the point where I'm basically going to wind down my business, and it's not because I'm incapable of doing this work. It's because it's no longer fun for me. And with security now, and having to I've reached the point that Gary Peaketism is that he's like, we can't care about our customers' businesses more than them. Well, I am at that point where I have a number of customers where I clearly care more about their business than they do. And that's not a fun place to be, because I'm telling them, you need to do this, you should do this. This is the best practice. This is important. What about this? Risk. And they're like, we're good. And it's like, all right, great. If you don't care, why do I? And if I don't care, why are we working together? So it's just, and I think, the truth is that from a financial perspective, I'm poised now to go and get a job, which sounds weird. I had to update my resume after 20 years. I'm like, what is that? Hey, ChatGPT, help me with my resume. Go ahead and hallucinate. Let's make it great, But I'm going to make more in a job with a salary, also less responsibility. I don't have to do the accounting. I'm not the person they're going to call when there's the big emergency, right? Like I'm not responsible for the business, and I'm going to make more money,
And it's going to be, and this
and
is
I'm probably
actually
going
what
to
we
have
were
more
talking
fun.
about. Yeah, we were talking about this at the conference we met at, that you were winding down your business because of many reasons. You know, most notably the one that you kind of pointed out, like it's the headache and the weighing the headache and the financials is not balancing anymore. So you are thinking about venturing into the dirty vendor side of the
Yeah,
MSP space, which is great because like you are a perfect candidate for one of the vendors that service MSPs, because they want to hear from MSPs that they can trust. So it's really
right.
good. I mean, I think it's going to be great that you're going to
I'm
excel,
actually really looking
and that
forward to it
it's
too. The more
yeah, I think it's going
conversations
to
I
be easy
have,
for you. I think it's just going to be like your day-to-day life personality is just going to fall right into this.
yeah, and that's something I've actually discovered too. Is I belong to a couple of peer groups. True Methods is one of the ones, and I strongly believe in peer groups. Like it doesn't matter what industry. Like I did it before I was in an MSP. Did some stuff in Vistage when I was younger, and different organizations. Like I did stuff with Rotary, and that gives you some personal fulfillment doing volunteer work. And when I was younger, did some brief stuff with Toastmasters, and I think it does. It doesn't matter necessarily that it is a business peer group, but like be involved more with your community and like-minded individuals. Anyway, one of the conversations that I was having with one of my peer folks this morning was a little bit about that, right? And we were talking about how and I think this is something you and I have briefly talked about, and I know when I was having some drinks at the conference, I definitely talked about it.
Don't know what you're
But
talking about.
it's like vendors don't choose to lie. Like there is no vendor that I believe is out in the marketplace purposely misleading MSPs about their products. But what I think happens is it takes a special type of person to do hardcore sales, right? And a lot of organizations, you can see as they like the startups change, right? And they grow, and suddenly sales is an extremely important thing. And I think you see this especially with the large vendors, right? The Kaseyas, the ConnectWises. Like they have legitimate sales teams, right? There's dozens or hundreds of salespeople. There are sales executives, and they're like heavily compensated, and sales is extremely important, right? And there's different types of sales, but ultimately, when you bring someone in to do sales who's got all the skill sets of a salesperson, but doesn't necessarily understand the technology, um, you end up in this place where, and it happens in all industries, right? Obviously we're talking about ours very specifically. You end up in this place where a salesperson will say a thing. Perhaps it's something they've heard, perhaps it's something they think they know, and they go off into the weeds about this can do that, right? Or and also there's this weird race. Like how many times have we heard single pane of glass? I mean, we've heard that for decades, but also like there's this weird like somehow people think everything is zero sum frequently, and it's like you have to have vendor A over vendor B, but potentially vendor A and vendor B could complement each other. Or worst case scenario, they both convince you that they're important and they overlap. And now suddenly you've got a bunch of stuff you don't need. So that I think is a big challenge. And that comes because there aren't MSP operators or MSP executives. Like that's not a natural like path for progression, right? The natural path for progression is that you build an MSP, you sell it, then you become a vendor or go work for a vendor, right? I mean, there are a lot of I think there is a cohort that exists of like MSP built startups that are
Mhm.
vendors, because an MSP wanted a piece of software, they wanted a thing to do something, and then they were like, "Oh, I'm gonna go build
Yeah,
this."
it's
And
more rare, but
oftentimes
yeah,
they
it does
still own
exist.
an MSP, and so they're not necessarily running that tech startup, but they are different, right? They're a lot different, and so anyway, I think you're right. I think that whichever vendor I do land with, I'm talking with a couple, so I'm not going to say any names right now. Nothing's been inked. Um, and I think that to be able to bring that perspective to whichever organization I work with, I think will be very valuable for them, and I think it will be really good um, because I've learned a statistic from this, this what I'm working on, and when I was at Write a Boom, you're talking with vendors, um, not necessarily about implementing their software, but more about like, how do you operate? Like, how are you funded? Da, 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 da. That's a question I think people need to ask too, right? One of the speakers brought up that we need to start asking about, the software bill of materials, right? Like, how is your product built? What are the potential supply chain risks to me as the implementer? And that's another question I think we need to start asking startups too: is how are you funded? Like, how much money do you have, right? Because there's a couple of small startups I talked to that are like, our burn rate's X, and they don't necessarily give you specific figures, but some of them are very transparent. But they'll be like, look, we got a year's worth of funding. So
You're like,
if I really believe in your product, though, that's not a huge problem, right? That's not necessarily a huge problem, because oftentimes funding cycles are short, right? Especially when you're pre-IPO and all of those things. And this particular, and that's the other thing too, that not everyone's familiar with, like the software startup ecosystem, right? They're not familiar with like what's an angel round, what's a round, like what what are those different things, right? So you may be a true startup to me is someone that's like pre-A round, right? Like they haven't really gotten a serious amount of funding, and they may be bootstrapping it somehow, or they, in this particular situation, I talked to a vendor that has money from a couple of the ginormous MSPs, which is another new thing that's happening in this market too, right? There's been so much consolidation in the past few years that some organizations choose to grow through acquisition, and they're looking for people like me that have done this for 15 or 20 years and are pretty much like, meh, I want something better to do. I want something more fulfilling. And then they're like, oh, give us your customers, give us your code. I want that. And then they've built a system that's designed to suck up those MSPs, and have now created these giant monolithic organizations. And I'm not talking crap about them because they're all going to come
that's
to me.
actually really interesting about asking the vendors about their funding, and that I actually never heard that. Which
and until I asked those questions,
like I live on the marketing team now, and I've never even had that discussion. Like, we should promote that we raised X. Well, we did. We had like press releases and stuff, but
right. And then the little banner goes on the website, and then
right, it's not like part of the everyday marketing. But it is, like you said, important. Like, are you guys 1 year into this thing, or are you like 7, or do you have $8 million? Do you have 100? Like, because I would like to invest my time, and
because that's ultimately right. We're investing our effort, right? We're investing it's not like we're getting equity out of the deal, but like we're participating in that, and it's okay. Like I don't think people should be scared that a company might only have a year's worth of cash laying around. That's just reality of how that stuff works. And at the same time, if we believe in that much, then our business is that much more valuable to them as a startup, right? And so in that case, it's like I'm putting my weight behind that particular product or service. And so I think that's important. But that also tells us how much more important the relationships are, right? So I need to make sure that I know and like trust and like understand how my vendors are operating. And if they are smaller vendors, there is potential risk there, right? I mean, there's risk on all levels, but it's something that we need to be aware of.
Yeah, it leans back into the entrepreneur. Like, you're a tech person that had a business, and now you need to make sure that the other businesses that you're in partnership with are operating good businesses as well. Like, maybe DNSFilter, we're just tech guys, and we have now all of a sudden we had a business. Like, you would want to know that. Like, and do you trust us enough to make it to the next level or not? That's something that you should have enough variables to make a decision on.
And I love that you said it that way, because I have worked with vendors that were that, right? They were tech people that started a product. I mean, you could throw a dart, and like I said, there's now a big enough cohort that you can recognize the ones that have been started by MSPs or have spun out of MSPs. And we worked with the product, that was like that. And it got to the point where it was completely obvious that that was the problem for their growth. And this was a few years ago, and it was the end of the year, and they were doing sort of, um, like a town hall. They did like a town hall webinar, right? And the CEO and the well, I'm going to use quotes because they weren't real. They were people in roles, CEO and the CTO, and they're describing like where they're at and their roadmap and things like that, right? And that's really important to be able to get that information. And I applaud them that they did that. But the challenge for them became, I don't think they were aware that they had reached the point where the founders had to get out of the way, and they needed to start hiring real people, right? They needed to have real developers, not the guy that enjoyed developing, right? Like they needed to bring those things in. And fast forward 2 or 3 years now, there's a whole new team coming in, right? New CEO, bringing in a bunch of people. They built a different product and exited and did some stuff, and now they're coming in, and it's like, oh, so suddenly this company is now taking all of that seriously, a real dev team, doing DevOps the right way.
And that's the signal in your mind, like, okay, now I can trust this product again.
I don't know if I necessarily would trust the product ever again.
There's other variables. There's other factors.
In simple terms, though, that's definitely a signal that there are some people there that are serious, right? Like the money behind it now has put because that's what happened ultimately, right? At some point, someone came in, smart money, and said, you need a better leadership team, right? And put that in place. And so now you've got an opportunity. Like if they execute correctly, then yeah, it could probably be an amazing product at some point. But it took them 2 to 3 years to figure that out, right? And so they lost us as a customer, shortly after that webinar. But like at the same time, like this is part of the maturity process of our industry, right? And we have a lot of technically smart individuals running MSPs, but we don't have a lot of like operationally mature MSPs,
right?
And that scares the crap out of me. Anyway, so that's one of the problems I want to try to help start to solve, and that's what I'll be exploring with my vendors or vendor that I eventually land at. But the idea that my personal goal is to land with a great company that has a fantastic culture and team that I can then start waking up again in the morning and feel like I'm making a big difference. I did 20 years ago when I started my business, right? And for the very, very long portion of the time that I operated at MSP, I really felt that I was making a difference for a lot of businesses. But the cybersecurity focus and that has really changed the game a lot. And I know I'm not alone in that there are people that also feel this way. I've talked to other business MSP owners and operators, and there's a lot of people that kind of feel that way. So, and change is coming, right? I mean, let's
explain that a little bit more. You're saying that like cybersecurity is like a new thing that's like not well understood. Is that what you mean?
It's not that it's not well understood. It's that it's so pervasive and it's so what's the right way to describe this? I guess
such a large risk. Maybe?
It's a huge risk. It's right, and that's ultimately what it is, right? It is like for many organizations inside and outside of our space, it is a ticking time bomb, right? And ultimately, the question is, it's like playing hot potato or like musical chairs, right? When the music stops, I hope you got a seat, because what you don't want to have is not have an incident response plan, not have cyber insurance, not have any of these things, right? Not have ever done a tabletop.
And they just don't know what they don't know.
Right. And even if you do know what you don't know, then it's kind of even worse because now you're acutely aware of the problem
and
the risk. Right. Right. Because essentially we are all like one click away from hell. And now we're racing to it forward with AI. And it's like, could we potentially like make the clicking less and the AIing more, and like can that make things worse? And I'm not like Skynet's coming and we're all going to die, but I do believe that we are moving so forward so fast, and it started with the pandemic, right? Like, there's anecdotal conversation and quotes like Bill Gates said, Microsoft was moving 10 years a year, right? Is how it looked for them operationally. And that did happen for it catapulted us forward. I mean, pandemic, honestly, in the last 5 years was the best year that we've ever had from a financial standpoint. Business, jumped because it was so high in demand. I got to the point where I couldn't talk to some of my friends because I had friends that owned restaurants that were like circling bankruptcy, and it was weird to have like a conversation.
Oh, yeah. You're like,
You
oh
know,
man, times are booming, things are great. How are you?
yeah,
You're like,
and the rest of the 80-90% of the world is
I
not.
just sell
And
my
so,
house and moved to
and yeah, and
out to the
I
woods.
had a friend that owned a restaurant, closed his restaurant just coincidentally, like in January, February of 2020, and was constructing a new one. Well, boom, can't get permits, can't get construction, can't get suddenly he's sitting I stood there with him in the dirt, of where his restaurant was supposed to be,
Man,
asking him how are you doing personally? How are you paying your bills, right? And luckily all of the people in his chain, between the banks and the landlords, everyone was
sympathetic.
cool about it, right?
Yeah.
Then that's community again, right? He had a great community, and now he's got a thriving restaurant and everything's great. But um, bankers were calling, or financial advisors are calling, hey, do you need a PPP loan? And it's like, we don't qualify that. Do you want the EIDL?
They're like, yeah,
we
you
don't
probably do.
qualify
Just
for
sign
that.
here. You probably do.
Yeah, a little bit of fraud going on, but yeah. So, but it was, it's like, So that made things weird. But anyway, that things have changed, and the risks now are much, much higher, right? Yes, there's fantastic rewards. That's always the balance, right? High risk, high reward. You can go put it all on red 28 and potentially win all of it back, but the house probably has the house does have the advantage.
They'll
right?
get it back
And so
eventually.
yeah, and that's what happens too, is do you want, as a MSP, operator or owner, do you want to struggle into the future, or do you want to thrive, right? And so and that's a lot of the challenge, is that we've reached a point now, because the risks are so much higher, that there's people just don't want to deal with that risk. And
What do you think
unfortunately, burying your
what-
head in the sand isn't an option.
That's not an option. Well, what do you think the thriving looks like? Like, what are some of the strategies that you would employ if you were gonna, throw your hat in the ring once more?
It's definitely on the compliance and the cybersecurity side of the fence, doing all of that right. The challenge is, it's not, and everyone's throwing AI at it, right? Microsoft's about to launch on April 1st, not a joke, Security Copilot, right? That's going to be a mid-market enterprise product. Small businesses could potentially use it. They just got to pay for it, right? And that's oftentimes and that's one of those conversations that we have. Ironically, or coincidentally, for all of our customers, they would rather pay a Microsoft license any day of the week than they would pay us more money. When we tried to raise rates a few years ago, when inflation went out of control, the way that we ended up doing it is we had some Microsoft licensing that we had bundled in our service licenses. And so we were doing all in seat price, and we just wrapped it all in, and we called it a basic, and the basic was $100 a user. Well, that included a $23 business premium license. And so instead of raising it from 100 to say 120 or $150, what we did is we just took the Microsoft license out of the bundle, kept it at $100, and then had them pay directly for the Microsoft licensing as a separate invoice. And so we essentially immediately increased revenue by making the customer pay directly for the licensing. And the bundling licensing from Microsoft made sense pre NCE, right? Before they put out the new commerce experience. And now the way Microsoft bastardized how they do licensing, and the weird obligations that you have, that no longer made sense for us. We wanted to really make sure that the customer was on the hook for those licenses, not just us. And so, but yeah, so we separated it for two reasons, but it ended up being sort of this interesting discovery that customers understand. what that tells me, at least in my sort of like discovery analysis of it, it tells me that they find Microsoft, or some people are Google, Amazon, whatever. They find those vendors critical to their businesses, but they still don't see us as a critical component, right? If it's easier for me to convince them to spend more on Microsoft licensing, they consider us expendable or replaceable, right? Because if I say, look, we need to raise your rates 6% or whatever, and they're like, oh, that's going to be a problem. That's because they don't value, like, and we did have some where they're just like, send us invoices, right? Like they didn't care. So we did have some of the right customers. The challenge is the right customer now is fewer and farther, in between. And I listened to a lot of people in my peer groups, and I talked to a lot of people, and I happened to hear one gentleman. I think I don't think he was an owner, but he was, like a technician. And he was talking to a vendor, and I just happened to be standing nearby. And, they were like, we've got this platform, da, 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 da. And he's like, I'm really interested in this. However, like I've heard the phrase tools moratorium come out of more people's mouths in the last month than I've ever in my life, which is neat. Because it's
neat.
It's like, well, it's neat because in a way, it's the way to say no. I'm not buying tools right now, right? Without saying no. Oh, we're in a tool moratorium. I'm sorry, it's out of my control. But this guy, he was a younger gentleman, so I want to call him a kid. I'm 47. Like, everyone's younger than me. That feels like in the tech space, except the other owners. Some people are older than me. But anyway, he's like, we need like 2 years to get our stack in order. And all I could think of is like, holy S. Like, what are any of us going to even be around in 2 years? Like, do we even know what 2 years? Like, 2 years is like, that might as well be a decade, right?
Like, I thought you were going to say next Tuesday or something.
Yeah. And it was interesting because then I looked at the vendor he was talking to, and I just saw this interesting look on his face. And I realized that he just didn't have a rebuttal for that. It was like, but also, and then when the person walked away, I went up to him and I said, well, how do you take that? Like, what do you think that meant? And the first thing was right. He's like, well, he's not the decision maker. I'm like, obviously. Okay, fair enough, right? If you're a salesperson, you want to talk to them, okay, from a sales standpoint, that's like, okay, done. But more of what I was interested in is like, what is that, like, is this where our industry is at? And so this leads me to the next big revelation that I found out from talking to vendors is, on average, the utilization of the licenses and the services that we purchase as MSPs is 50%. That's the high side. And,
really?
I experienced that with one of the vendors that we worked with a couple of years ago when we signed up. They had a new service, and I'm like, oh, this is great. I need to get this for my customers. And it's like, oh, I can get it on the early bird pricing, right? And I'm a sucker for a deal. And suddenly I'm spending, $600, $700, $800 a month. And 8 months down the road, we haven't deployed, which means it's a cost. I'm not deriving any new revenue off that. And so, like, unused seats, unused licenses, whether it's on purpose because, it's never on purpose, but if it's a cognitive choice that someone made, like, I want the $500 seat package because I get an extra 20% off, versus, and hunters used to do this to me, love hunters to death, but I used to do this math in my head, and I would be like, hey, you're sneaky, because I'm not going to save enough money if I buy the 500 bundle until I hit, like 375 or something, right? And I'm not there yet. So you're like trying to get me to buy more now because I can give you more money, and then I'm going to grow into it, right? Which always sounds great, like that, like the best laid plans of mice and men, right? Like, we're always like, oh, we're going to grow into that. How many times have you heard a salesperson say, you only need 2 customers, or you only need 1 new deal, and you go cover this whole thing? And like, that is the unfortunate math that's constantly going through people's heads. And the shiny object syndrome is, and you combine all this together, and this gets back to sort of where we were coming from with this, of why it's no longer fun, right? Because I mean, at Right Boom alone, there was almost 100 vendors, right? And like 50 of them were new this year compared to last year at that particular conference. And there was literally companies I had never heard of. Never heard of. I have no idea where they came from. And I didn't even stop to talk to them because I'm like, you know what? I don't have time for this crap. I do not have time to figure out who you are. And now I'm getting follow-up emails, and they're like, did you come by our booth? Do you remember? Like, if you got to send a follow-up email that says, let me refresh your memory on what we do, like, yeah, then that is hello, red flag. And, but yeah, anyway, so if I was doing this all again, I would definitely focus on the compliance side because that's driven a lot by regulation, right? And
yeah, they can't get around it.
Cyber insurance has been very good for us over the last couple of years. And I would definitely double down in focusing on that. And that's actually advice I just gave to one of my peer members this morning, because cyber insurance has been the dog that wags the tail, right? Or excuse me, the tail that wags the dog.
Yeah, tail that wags the dog.
You do a risk assessment, right? You got like unquoted service pass, you got PII and documents that are and hard drives that aren't encrypted. Like that person's not eligible for cyber insurance. They're not going to find a policy that's going to take them, right? They don't have EDR deployed. They,
unless
they don't have the
lie
basics
or something.
And believe it or not, that's happening, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's the next shoe that falls is they're do have some kind of an incident. Yeah, I mean, and they are starting to do that, right? Like, yeah, and that's also a challenge. Like, that's another place where we're now seeing like a challenge, right? Because all of the major cyber carriers now they've acquired like MSSPs, right? They have money involved. They're like, hey, do you need compliance services? You bought insurance from us. We can help you with compliance, And so I know people that have lost, MSPs that have lost long-term clients to cyber insurance companies that pushed either their own or another compliance partner down into that relationship. And it drove a wedge in there, and it didn't matter that they were a 10-year client. They were like, we need compliance. They didn't realize that the MSP they were working with was capable of doing it because that MSP wasn't having those conversations, and boom, lost a big customer. And and that's what's happening, right? So yeah, it's a lot of, like you said, it's cybersecurity is complicated, but it's not complicated like algebra. It's complicated like making sure you keep the refrigerator door closed every time you use it, right? Because sometimes you're in there, you're like, I need these 3 or 4 things, and you do the thing with the foot, you close it, and the door doesn't. Yeah, the door doesn't close. You walk away and you make your sandwich, you do whatever, and then 2 hours later, you're like, oh crap, is the milk rotten? Right? Yes. Like that's what cyber insurance and that's what cybersecurity and cyber compliance is about, making sure that the refrigerator door is always closed.
Yeah, exactly. But I was going to say, let's shift real quick to another topic. I was encouraging you when we were chatting in person to start your own podcast called Defender Does That, because you were telling me of all the things that Microsoft Defender does, and showing me, in fact, because I haven't had the opportunity to use Defender because I use a real computer. It's called a Mac. You should look it up. But anyway,
they
tell me a little
Windows
bit about
Defender
that.
for Mac. From an EDR standpoint, now it's available for Mac. So that's something that was a pretty conscious decision I made early on. I've been a strong Microsoft partner all my life, like all of my business iterations. When we first started, before Microsoft had real co-sell, before Microsoft had, we used to have a TAM, technical account manager, I think what they were referred to as, and then for a while, the telephone, I can't remember. But at one point, we actually had a real Microsoft account manager, right, that I would talk to, and like, can we go to lunch? Yeah. I was like, wow, you're human. And then they had programs, right? And so I'll never forget, it was like, because software, right? Like we used to, that's what we did. We sold software all the time, right? Like, oh, hey, there's a new version of Exchange coming, everybody. Get out your licensing checkbook. It's time to write some checks, And, I remember one deal they did where they sent us a spreadsheet, and they're like, this is all of, these are all the customers in your zip codes that are due for new versions of Exchange. Like, we're going to send out postcards. Let's start making calls, right? And that's the kind of thing that we did before cloud. And then, in my environment, we worked a lot with, like I said, small businesses. So we'd have an office of 20 people, and they would, I distinctly remember this one deal we were working on, and they came to us and they said, look, we want to take advantage of Office. We'd like to use Exchange. I'm like, okay, you're a perfect candidate for Microsoft Small Business Server, right? Well, okay, what does that entail? Well, you're going to need, they didn't, they basically needed everything. They had computers, they weren't, it was just, and it was Windows, I think we were Windows 7 at that point. But it was like, all right, you're going to need licensing for the computers. You need Windows. You're going to need Office licensing for the computers. You're going to need a server, which you don't have. And that server is going to need to be capable of running all of this software. And so it's going to, redundancy, blah, 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 right? And by the time we pull in the calculator wheel, and at the end, it's 20 grand for an office of 20 people. And that's an upfront investment they have to make, right? Like, cash or credit, like, how are we doing this, right? And it's like, oh, you want to finance it? Sure, we got a financing partner, no problem, but we're not a bank. And that almost always those things that people wanted, like, it's hard to drop 20 grand, and like in any business, right? And so that made that sales cycle really slow and arduous. And then there was this thing, they're like, we're doing this online blah 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 business productivity suite, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's Exchange, that's SharePoint, that's essentially all the stuff, this fancy thing called SkyDrive, which became OneDrive, right? Remember when they called it SkyDrive?
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, and I was like, they don't pay up front. It's just a subscription.
Like it's already financed, basically. They're just
Right.
financing. And the
I
Microsoft's
was
like,
like,
yes, but forever.
yeah. I'm like, when do we sign up? We need this right now. And so, because in my mind, I was like, how many deals did I have for 20 grand that I couldn't close because people couldn't find a way to finance? And so, and that is, it was just a logical progression. It just made sense. And so, like I remember, like, and all those nightmares went away, right? Like patching Exchange server, which is funny because there's still people doing that. Like, if you're patching Exchange server, stop. Like, just get rid of it. Just get rid of it already. Like, there's no benefit to having on-prem equipment anymore. Anyway, but yeah, that's what happened. And so, throughout that, we took advantage. Every time Microsoft was like, hey, we've got this new thing, we got Defender. Great. All right. Now Defender does vulnerability management. Oh, great. Let's get that license, right? That's $2. Great. Let's do it. Let's add those on. And slowly, yes, you do have to pay higher licensing fees to be able to get these features. But I don't need as many third-party vendors to manage our customers, right? And we heavily are relying more on automation. And for example, I was trying to install my fancy microphone on my new computer that my computer died and I had to get this new computer. And I downloaded we were talking about this, I got a Focusrite Scarlett. I go get the drivers like normal. I hit install and I can't write to the temp drive. Error. And I do it a couple times thinking this, like, is the software crap? Is it my fault? And then I realize, Defender blocked that. And I go and look at the little security center, and it's good. Like, yeah, it is, right? Attack surface reduction. Again, these are things you have to turn on and tune, and that's part of the problem why people don't do them. It's also part of the problem why people buy software from vendors and don't deploy it, because you have to put the effort in to understand them. But attack surface reduction blocked this piece of software. It's for prevalence and age. And I'm certain it's prevalence in this particular situation. So what that means is Microsoft, across all of their endpoints of all of the customers that use Defender, attack surface reduction, all of that telemetry that feeds back to Microsoft, put on your tinfoil hat, they're stealing my data, no, whatever. They're just making life better. There's always got to be a patient zero. I don't want to be it. And so they have not seen that particular, it's not a hugely common, it's for audio files, right? Like, how many people run podcasts anymore that actually
now they have another ping in their database about it, and you making an exception for it. And now
exactly.
Like, okay.
And that's what we had to do. So it took 3 minutes, right? We log into the Defender thing, you put in the exception for that particular piece of software, and then you go into the company portal, you hit sync by policies, and within 3 minutes you can run the software. But like, how many vendors are doing stuff like that, right? We've got application whitelisting is kind of a thing, or zero trust, they call it. Application zero trust is one of the buzzwords. But like, do I need a third-party product with a lot of management overhead, or can I lean on Microsoft's built-in tools that exist within the product, right? By not having to have OAuth or third-party API connections into my systems or my client systems, I'm reducing the attack footprint.
Yeah.
So is that worth potentially paying a little bit more for a license? Got to do the math on that and decide. But like that's a thing that happens quite frequently. And you and I did this. It got to a point where we made this into a really stupid game, and it probably got really irritating at the end because I kept saying that to you. I'm like, Defender does that.
Yeah.
When someone would say like, we do, and I'm like, Defender does that. So
Well,
anyway, yeah.
Is there anything that Defender doesn't do or doesn't do well that you use something else for?
DNS filtering. And honestly,
Well, I mean,
yes.
obviously. Do they do DNS?
Yeah.
They barely do DNS filtering.
There's some DNS security, but it's not filtering the way that you'd expect it. You can go and block and whitelist and do a bunch of stuff like that, but you don't have the luxury of the categories and that all of the behind the scenes stuff that you guys do that's so powerful. But yeah, but you know what? Like, SASE is another big one, right? Like, everyone's talking about SASE, Secure Edge. Microsoft's got that in beta. That's going to GA soon as well too. And so again, it's all and then, but because from the security standpoint, and and I know we're at time, so I'll try to make this quick. But like, when you have that end-to-end solution, and you get all of those signals. Now you can apply that same information to all your conditional access policies, right? So you got compliance policies in there, you got conditional access policies, and they work off of each other. And so if you're coming in on Microsoft's system, you're using Microsoft's Secure Edge system, yes, you can get that data from third parties. Do you need to? Is it better? Is it faster?
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah, most business
food for thought.
Yeah, most business clients are already in the Microsoft ecosystem. Yeah, we're going to
do a series. We'll do a little series on it. Yeah, I think it'll be a lot of fun to explore some of the specifics around that.
Absolutely. Well, Derek, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. And I don't know, we're going to have to kick you off the cab if you sell your MSP. Is that what's going to happen? No, it's going to break my
guess. Yeah, I know. That'll be sad. We can still be friends.
All right, we'll still be friends.
We always have LinkedIn.
Well,
they can't take that away from us.
No, they can't. Well, thank you, Derek. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
That was a great conversation with Derek. And if you wish to become a guest on DNS Unfiltered, just reach out. I'm very easy to find. Now, for that secret feature I promised. I'm talking about DNSFilter's latest ace in the hole, malicious domain protection. And yes, it has been available for a few months. And yes, I even mentioned it at the beginning in the changelog, but it's too important not to call out again. DNSFilter has always been the digital bouncer, keeping the bad stuff out of your network and devices. In 2023 alone, we blocked 24 billion attempts to crash the party. Now with malicious domain protection, DNSFilter has leveled up again. This feature uses computer brains, machine learning for those in the know, to spot domains that are up to no good even before they make their move. It's a crystal ball that sees into the future. Imagine domains so tricky and sneaky they dominate the hide-and-seek championship at your local Y, and that's what we're up against. Malicious domain protection specializes in catching these slippery characters by analyzing their names. It's got a knack for spotting the weird ones that look like a cat danced on a keyboard. These are often the first warning signs of cyber nasties like malware and phishing scams trying to sneak past your defenses. Let's dive into a demo real quick. Click. There we go. Turning on malicious domain protection is super easy. Log into your DNSFilter dashboard, edit or create a new policy, navigate to Advanced, Extra Settings, look for malicious domain protection, and click. Congratulations, you've just updated your defense game. During testing, malicious domain protection identified over 7,000 risky domains not recognized by other sources. It detected threats up to 59 days earlier than third-party feeds. With malicious domain protection, DNSFilter isn't just reacting, it's predicting. So there you have it, MDP, a new again DNSFilter must-have, must-enable feature. Thank you all for joining me on this episode of DNS Unfiltered. I'll see you next time.